My brother stole my inheritance and said, "Dad never loved you anyway." I let him celebrate for 6 months. Then I showed him the real will. The mahogany conference table in Peterson and Associates' law office reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows as I sat listening to my father's will being read for what I believed would be the last time. The leather chair beneath me still held the warmth of previous occupants, and I could smell the faint aroma of expensive coffee that always permeated this downtown law firm where 3 generations of my family had conducted their most important business. My name is Catherine Kate Morrison, and I was 34 years old on the day I learned that everything I thought I knew about my family was wrong. Sitting across from me was my older brother, Marcus Morrison, 41 years old and wearing the same triumphant smirk that had dominated his face since our father's funeral 3 weeks earlier. Attorney James Peterson, a distinguished man in his 60s who had known our family for over 30 years, cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses as he prepared to read the final provisions of what he called the official last will and testament of Robert Harrison Morrison. My father had been a successful real estate developer who built Morrison Construction from a single truck and a dream into one of the most respected commercial development companies in the Pacific Northwest. Over 43 years, he had accumulated substantial wealth, a portfolio of commercial properties worth approximately $12 million, residential investments totaling $8 million, liquid assets of $3.2 million, and the family estate, a stunning 47-acre property in the hills overlooking Seattle that had been our childhood home. The reading had not gone as I expected. To my son, Marcus Morrison, Peterson had read in his measured professional tone, I leave the entirety of Morrison Construction, including all associated properties, contracts, and business assets. Additionally, I bequeath to Marcus the family estate and all remaining personal property, with the understanding that he will continue the Morrison legacy with the dedication and business acumen that have always defined our family. The words had hit me like a physical blow. I sat in stunned silence as Peterson continued with minor bequests to household staff and charitable organizations. My name appeared only once in the entire document. To my daughter, Catherine Morrison, I leave the sum of $50,000, trusting that her husband's medical practice will provide adequately for her needs. $50,000. Out of a $23 million estate, my father had left me $50,000. Marcus had barely contained his satisfaction as Peterson concluded the reading. While I struggled to process this devastating rejection, my brother had immediately begun discussing transition, timelines, and property transfers with the attorney. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had always expected this outcome, as if my complete disinheritance was the natural order of things. The most painful part wasn't the money, though the financial blow was staggering. It was the implications of what this will represented. My father had apparently believed that my value to the family was minimal enough to warrant a token inheritance, while my brother received everything we had built together over decades of shared work and love. But it was what Marcus said to me in the parking lot afterward that transformed my shock into something colder and more calculating. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Stories like these need to be shared. I hope you're not too surprised, Kate, Marcus had said as we stood beside my modest Honda Civic while he approached his new BMW, recently purchased, I now realized, in anticipation of his inheritance. Dad always knew who the real Morrison was. You've been playing house with your doctor husband while I've been building the business Dad cared about. I had stood there silently, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred in that conference room. The truth is, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the cruel edge I remembered from our childhood, Dad never loved you anyway, not the way he loved me. You were always just the daughter who married well and moved away. I was the son who stayed and proved himself worthy of the Morrison name. The words cut deeper than any financial loss could have. This wasn't just about money or property. This was my brother telling me that our father's love had been conditional, earned, and ultimately denied to me. You got exactly what you deserved, Marcus had concluded, climbing into his BMW with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had won the ultimate family competition. $50,000 for the daughter who never really belonged here anyway. I had driven home to my husband David in complete silence, unable to even begin explaining what had transpired. David was a pediatric surgeon at Seattle Children's Hospital, and while we lived comfortably, we were hardly wealthy. My inheritance, whatever it might have been, would have secured our children's education, allowed us to upgrade from our modest home, and provided the financial security that comes with generational wealth. Instead, I was left with $50,000, and the knowledge that my father had apparently valued me so little that he had bequeathed me less than he left to his longtime housekeeper. But that evening, as I sat in my kitchen trying to make sense of what had happened, I remembered something that Marcus had forgotten, something that would change everything. Growing up in the Morrison household had been like living in a carefully orchestrated business operation. Our father had been demanding but fair, expecting excellence from both Marcus and me in academics, character, and work ethic. The family business had always been presented as something we might both inherit if we proved ourselves worthy of the Morrison name and values. Marcus, being 7 years older, had gotten a head start in proving himself. He joined Morrison Construction immediately after college, working his way up through various positions while I pursued my education and career in pediatric nursing. By the time I graduated college, Marcus had already established himself as our father's right-hand man and apparent heir to the business empire. But I had never felt excluded from our father's affections or plans. Even after marrying David and moving to our own home, I remained close to my father, visiting regularly and helping with various business and personal matters. He had always treated me as a valued advisor and cherished daughter, asking my opinion on important decisions and including me in family business discussions, which made the devastating contents of that will even more confusing and painful. Evening after the will reading, I called my father's longtime secretary, Mrs. Helen Martinez, who had worked for Morrison Construction for over 20 years. Helen had always been fond of me, and I hoped she might have insights into my father's final months that could help me understand his decision to leave me virtually nothing. "Oh, Kate," Helen said when I explained the reason for my call, "I was wondering when you would contact me. I was hoping you would reach out before too much time passed." Her tone suggested she knew something significant about the situation. "Helen, I'm trying to understand what happened. I know Dad was disappointed in some of Marcus's decisions, but I never imagined it would lead to this." "Honey, your father was more than disappointed. He was deeply concerned about Marcus's integrity and business judgment. But more than that, he was worried about what would happen to you if Marcus gained control of everything." Helen's words sent a chill through me. "What do you mean?" "Your father came to the office in May, about a month after his heart attack. He spent the entire afternoon locked in his office with Attorney Peterson, working on what he called insurance for Kate's future. He was very secretive about it. But he did ask me to make several copies of some documents and store them in his personal safe. Insurance for Kate's future. My father had been planning something, and whatever it was, Marcus clearly knew nothing about it. Helen, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you be willing to meet with me? I think there might be more to this situation than what we heard in that will reading. Kate, I've been hoping you would ask. There are things your father entrusted to me that I think you need to know about. Can you meet me at the office tomorrow afternoon? Marcus will be in Portland meeting with contractors all day. The following afternoon, I sat in my father's office for the first time since his death. The space still smelled like his cologne and the pipe tobacco he enjoyed during late evening work sessions. Helen sat across from my father's massive oak desk, holding a manila envelope that she handled with the reverence of someone carrying precious cargo. Your father gave me specific instructions about this envelope, Helen began, her voice carrying the weight of shared secrets. He told me to wait 6 months after his death before sharing its contents with you. He said that would give Marcus enough time to show his true colors and give you enough time to understand what you were really dealing with. 6 months. My father had planned for me to discover whatever was in that envelope exactly 6 months after his death, which meant I still had 3 months to wait before Helen could reveal its contents. But Helen, the will has already been executed. Marcus has already taken control of everything. What could possibly change after 6 months? Helen's smile held secrets that I couldn't yet fathom. Kate, your father was a very careful man who understood people better than they understood themselves. He knew exactly what Marcus would do with 6 months of unchecked power, and he planned accordingly. I don't understand. Your father created what he called a character test. He wanted to see what Marcus would do if he believed he had inherited everything without any oversight or accountability. Your father was convinced that Marcus would reveal his true nature if given enough rope to hang himself with. The implications of what Helen was telling me began to sink in. My father had orchestrated this entire situation. My devastation, Marcus's triumph, the apparent injustice of that will reading, all as some kind of elaborate test. Helen, are you telling me that the will we heard wasn't actually my father's final will? I'm not telling you anything specific, honey, but I am telling you that your father loved you more than you know, and he was far more clever than Marcus ever gave him credit for. I left that meeting with more questions than answers, but also with something I hadn't felt since that devastating day in Peterson's office: hope. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to Marcus's activities. Helen had suggested that my father was expecting Marcus to show his true colors, so I decided to observe exactly what those colors might be. What I discovered was deeply disturbing. Marcus had immediately begun making dramatic changes to Morrison Construction. He fired several longtime employees who had been with the company for decades, replacing them with his personal friends who had no construction experience. He sold 3 profitable properties at below-market prices to investors who happened to be his golf buddies. Most concerning, he began using company funds for personal expenses that had nothing to do with business operations. Within 2 months of inheriting the company, Marcus had purchased a $180,000 Porsche, a $50,000 boat, and had taken 3 expensive vacations, all charged to Morrison Construction's corporate credit cards. He justified these purchases as business expenses and client entertainment, but anyone with accounting knowledge could see they were personal indulgences funded by company assets. But Marcus's most revealing behavior was how he treated our father's legacy and the employees who had helped build Morrison Construction. He showed no respect for the relationships our father had cultivated over 4 decades. He dismissed long-term suppliers, canceled charity commitments our father had made, and generally conducted business with the arrogance of someone who believed inherited wealth made him untouchable. Most painful was how he spoke about our father during this period. At family gatherings and business meetings, Marcus began rewriting history, portraying himself as the driving force behind Morrison Construction's success and diminishing our father's contributions to the company's growth. Dad was getting too sentimental in his later years, Marcus told our Uncle Frank during a 4th of July barbecue. He was too attached to old ways of doing business that weren't profitable anymore. The company needed fresh leadership and modern thinking. I listened to these comments with growing anger, but I also remembered Helen's words about patience and waiting for the right moment. My father had apparently planned for this behavior, and I was beginning to trust that he had also planned for its consequences. The changes Marcus made to Morrison Construction weren't just personally offensive, they were also financially destructive. The experienced employees he fired had been responsible for the company's reputation for quality work and customer service. The suppliers he alienated had provided materials at preferential rates based on decades of loyal partnership. The charitable commitments he canceled had built community goodwill that translated into business opportunities. By the 4th month after inheriting the company, Morrison Construction was experiencing problems my father had never encountered in over 4 decades of business. Customers were complaining about work quality. Suppliers were demanding higher prices and shorter payment terms. The local business community was beginning to view Morrison Construction as an unreliable partner under Marcus's leadership. But Marcus seemed oblivious to these mounting problems. He continued spending company money on personal luxuries while blaming any business difficulties on market conditions and changes in the construction industry. He refused to acknowledge that his management decisions might be contributing to the company's declining reputation and financial performance. During this period, I also began learning more about Marcus's character from people who had worked with him for years. The employees he had fired were willing to share their experiences with someone they trusted, and their stories painted a disturbing picture of Marcus's behavior when he thought he was untouchable. "Your brother always thought he was entitled to special treatment," said Tom Bradley, who had been Morrison Construction's head foreman for 18 years before Marcus fired him. "When your father was alive, Marcus had to behave professionally. But the moment he inherited the company, he started treating all of us like his personal servants." Tom described incidents where Marcus had demanded that employees work on his personal property during company time, using company materials and equipment for projects that had nothing to do with Morrison Construction's business. When employees questioned these practices, Marcus reminded them that he now owned the company and could fire anyone who didn't appreciate their job security. Your father built Morrison Construction on respect and integrity, Tom continued. Marcus is destroying that reputation as fast as he can spend your father's money. These conversations confirmed what I was observing from a distance. Marcus wasn't just making poor business decisions. He was revealing a fundamental lack of character that our father had apparently recognized, but hoped Marcus might overcome if given the right motivation. 3 months after the will reading, I received a FaceHA call from Detective Raymond Costa of the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Ms. Morrison, I'm calling about some irregularities we've discovered in Morrison Construction's financial records. We're investigating potential embezzlement and fraud, and we'd like to speak with you about your knowledge of the company's operations. My heart raced as Detective Costa explained that someone had filed a complaint alleging that Marcus was using company funds for personal expenses and engaging in fraudulent business practices. The investigation had been ongoing for several weeks, and they had already gathered substantial evidence of financial misconduct. Detective, I should tell you that I'm no longer involved with Morrison Construction. My brother inherited the company after our father's death. We're aware of that, Ms. Morrison, but we understand you worked closely with your father for many years and might have insights into normal business operations versus potentially fraudulent activities. I agreed to meet with Detective Costa the following day, curious about who might have filed the complaint that triggered their investigation. The next afternoon, sitting in the police department's conference room, Detective Costa spread financial documents across the table that painted a damning picture of Marcus's activities over the past 3 months. Ms. Morrison, are you familiar with these types of expenses being charged to Morrison Construction during your father's management of the company? I examined the records carefully. The pattern was clear and devastating. Marcus had charged $67,000 in personal expenses to company accounts in just 3 months. Luxury dinners, expensive clothing, exotic vacations, high-end electronics, all disguised as business expenses but clearly for personal use. Detective, my father would never have approved these types of charges. Morrison Construction has always maintained strict policies about personal versus business expenses. That's what we suspected. We've also discovered that your brother has been selling company assets at below-market prices to personal associates, then receiving what appear to be kickback payments to his personal accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had been systematically looting Morrison Construction, treating the family business like his personal bank account. Detective, can I ask who filed the original complaint that started your investigation? Detective Costa smiled and pulled out another file. The complaint was filed by attorney James Peterson, acting as the executor of your father's estate. He's been monitoring the company's financial activities as part of his fiduciary responsibilities. James Peterson. My father's attorney had been watching Marcus's activities and had triggered a criminal investigation when the evidence of fraud became undeniable. Ms. Morrison, there's something else you should know. Mr. Peterson has requested that you attend a meeting at his office tomorrow afternoon. He said it was related to your father's estate and that the timing was exactly as Mr. Morrison had planned. That night, I barely slept. 6 months had passed since my father's death, which meant Helen could finally share the contents of that mysterious envelope. A criminal investigation had been launched into Marcus's activities, and now Peterson wanted to see me for reasons he described as being exactly as my father had planned. The next afternoon, I sat in the same conference room where I had learned about my devastating inheritance 6 months earlier. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. Helen Martinez sat beside me, holding the envelope she had guarded for half a year. Attorney Peterson wore an expression I had never seen before, something that looked like anticipation mixed with satisfaction. Kate, Peterson began, your father was one of the most intelligent men I ever knew. He understood people's character better than they understood themselves. 6 months ago, when I read what you believed was his final will, I was following his explicit instructions to test Marcus's integrity when given unlimited power and no oversight. Peterson opened a thick folder and removed a document I had never seen before. This is your father's actual final will and testament, dated May 15th, exactly 1 month after his heart attack. The document we read 6 months ago was what your father called the character test. It was designed to give Marcus enough rope to hang himself, which, according to Detective Costa's investigation, he has done spectacularly. My hands shook as Peterson handed me the real will. The document was much longer and more detailed than the version we had heard 6 months earlier. Kate, your father left you everything. Morrison Construction, the family estate, all properties, all investments, and all liquid assets. Marcus receives a trust fund that provides him with $100,000 annually, provided he maintains employment and demonstrates responsible financial behavior. I stared at the document, unable to process what I was reading. Everything. My father had left me everything, while giving Marcus exactly what Marcus had given me, a modest allowance that demonstrated his limited faith in his son's character. But Peterson, how is this possible? How could you read a fake will in your office 6 months ago? Because your father instructed me to do exactly that. The character test will was legally valid for 6 months, giving Marcus temporary control of the company while we observed his behavior. Your father predicted that Marcus would reveal his true character when given unchecked power, and he wanted documented evidence of that character before transferring permanent control to you. Helen opened her envelope and pulled out several documents. Kate, your father also left these for you. Financial records showing that he had been aware of Marcus's questionable judgment for over 2 years. Background reports on the friends Marcus has been doing business with, and this letter, written specifically for today. I opened the letter with trembling hands. My dearest Kate, if you are reading this letter, it means 6 months have passed since my death, and Marcus has revealed exactly the character I suspected he possessed. I'm sorry for the pain this test has caused you, but I needed absolute proof of what kind of man your brother had become before entrusting you with our family's legacy. You are the child who inherited my values of hard work, integrity, and service to others. You are the one who stayed by my bedside during my heart attack while Marcus was too busy to visit his dying father. You are the Morrison who will honor our family name and use our resources to build something meaningful rather than simply consuming what others have created. Marcus has been given enough rope to hang himself, and I suspect he has used it exactly as I predicted. The money he has stolen, the business relationships he has destroyed, and the disrespect he has shown to our employees and legacy will serve as evidence of why he was never worthy of inheriting what we built together. Marcus always believed that being my son gave him automatic rights to inherit my success. But success isn't inherited. It's earned through character, integrity, and service to others. You have demonstrated these qualities throughout your life, while Marcus has demonstrated their opposite when he thought no one was watching. I have observed Marcus's behavior for years, hoping he would mature into a man worthy of our family legacy. Instead, I have watched him become increasingly entitled, selfish, and disrespectful toward the people who helped build Morrison Construction. He treats our employees like servants, our suppliers like obstacles, and our family legacy like his personal treasure chest. The heart attack I suffered 6 months ago gave me time to reflect on what would happen to everything we built together if Marcus inherited control without accountability. I realized that giving him unchecked power would reveal his true character, and I wanted that character to be documented before making irreversible decisions about our family's future. I love you, Kate. I have always loved you more than you knew. This test was not about questioning your worth. It was about proving Marcus's unworthiness to inherit what you deserve. Build something beautiful with what I'm leaving you. Use it to create the kind of life and legacy that would make me proud. Treat our employees with respect, honor our commitments to the community, and remember that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. Marcus will likely face legal consequences for his behavior over the past 6 months. I have ensured that all of his financial misconduct will be discovered and prosecuted appropriately. This is not revenge. It is accountability, something Marcus has never experienced in his privileged life. I hope that facing consequences for his choices will teach Marcus lessons that my love and patience never could. Perhaps losing everything he thought he deserved will help him understand the difference between entitlement and earning respect through character. All my love, Dad Marcus will be arrested this afternoon for embezzlement and fraud. I've ensured that he will have time to reflect on his choices, while you take control of what rightfully belongs to you." Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading my father's letter. The man I had thought rejected me had actually orchestrated the most elaborate demonstration of love and trust I could imagine. Peterson continued with the legal details. "Kate, as of today, you are the legal owner of Morrison Construction and all associated assets. Marcus's temporary control ended at midnight last night, and all of his financial decisions over the past 6 months are being reviewed for possible restitution. What about the money he's stolen? The assets he's sold inappropriately? Your father anticipated that as well. All major asset sales require board approval, and the board consists of you, me, and Helen. Marcus never had the authority to sell those properties, which means all transactions can be reversed. The personal expenses he charged to company accounts will be recovered through the criminal restitution process." Detective Costa arrived at Peterson's office at 4:17 p.m. with a warrant for Marcus's arrest. I watched through the conference room window as my brother was escorted from the Morrison Construction building in handcuffs, finally facing consequences for the character he had revealed when he thought no one was watching. That evening, my phone rang constantly as news of Marcus's arrest spread through our family and business community. Each call brought expressions of shock, support, and in some cases, relief from people who had witnessed his behavior over the past 6 months but felt powerless to challenge him. The most satisfying call came from my Uncle Frank, who had watched Marcus dismiss our father's contributions during that 4th of July barbecue. "Kate, I have to tell you, I'm not surprised by any of this. Marcus has been acting like he built Morrison Construction himself, showing no respect for your father's memory or the people who actually created the company's success. I'm glad to see him finally held accountable. But the most important call came from David, my husband, who had watched me struggle with the pain of apparent rejection for 6 months. Kate, I'm so proud of you for handling this with such grace, and I'm so glad your father's real feelings about you have finally been revealed. You deserve to know how much he loved and trusted you." Over the following weeks, I began the process of taking control of Morrison Construction. The company was in better shape than I had feared. Marcus's damage had been significant but not catastrophic, thanks to my father's safeguards and the relatively short duration of his control. I reinstated the employees Marcus had fired, restored relationships with suppliers and contractors, and resumed the charitable commitments that had been part of our family's business philosophy for decades. Most importantly, I began implementing my own vision for how Morrison Construction could grow, while maintaining the values that had built its reputation. The process of rebuilding Morrison Construction's reputation required patience, humility, and hard work. I personally visited every client who had experienced problems during Marcus's management, apologizing for the company's failure to meet their expectations and offering to correct any deficiencies at no charge. I also met with every employee, contractor, and supplier that Marcus had alienated during his 6 months of control. Some were willing to give Morrison Construction another chance based on their respect for our father's legacy. Others required time and demonstrated reliability before they would trust the company again. But the most important conversations were with the longtime employees who had been fired by Marcus for questioning his decisions. These men and women had dedicated decades of their lives to building Morrison Construction's reputation for quality and integrity. Marcus had discarded them as easily as replacing old equipment, but I knew their knowledge and experience were irreplaceable. "Tom," I said during my meeting with Tom Bradley, the fired foreman, "I want you to know that Morrison Construction needs you and values what you've contributed to our success. Marcus made a terrible mistake when he fired you, and I hope you'll consider coming back to help rebuild what he damaged." Tom had been understandably cautious about returning to a company where he had been treated so poorly, but he eventually agreed to rejoin Morrison Construction with a substantial raise and a guarantee that he would be treated with the respect his experience deserved. "Your father was a good man who built something worth preserving," Tom told me during his first week back. "I'm willing to help you restore Morrison Construction to what it was before Marcus nearly destroyed it." Marcus pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud charges 3 months later. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution for the money he had stolen. The properties he had sold below market value were recovered through civil litigation, and his expensive purchases were liquidated to fund restitution payments. But perhaps the most fitting consequence was the public revelation of his character. The local business community, which had watched his behavior with growing concern, finally understood why our father had chosen me to continue the Morrison legacy. During his sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement. Standing in that courtroom, looking at my brother who had told me that our father never loved me anyway, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and vindication. Your Honor, Marcus Morrison told me that our father never loved me, and that I got exactly what I deserved when I inherited $50,000 from a $23 million estate. He was right that I got exactly what I deserved, just not in the way he meant. I paused, looking directly at Marcus, who sat at the defendant's table without meeting my eyes. I deserved a father who loved me enough to ensure I inherited his values along with his assets. I deserved a father who trusted me to carry on our family's legacy of integrity and service to others. And I deserved a father who was wise enough to test the character of those around him before entrusting them with the power to harm others. The courtroom was silent as I continued. Marcus thought he was inheriting money and property. Instead, he inherited an opportunity to reveal his true character, and he failed that test completely. I hope that during his time in prison, he reflects on the difference between wealth and character, between inheritance and integrity. After the sentencing, I walked out of that courthouse as the sole owner of Morrison Construction, carrying forward a legacy built on the foundation of my father's love and trust, rather than Marcus's sense of entitlement. 6 months later, I stood in my father's office, now my office, reviewing plans for our largest community development project ever. Morrison Construction was partnering with the city to build affordable housing for working families, using innovative construction techniques that would provide quality homes at sustainable prices. Helen Martinez knocked on my door, carrying the Daily Mail and wearing the smile that had become her trademark since discovering that her decades of loyalty to our family had been rewarded with justice rather than Marcus's threatened layoffs. Kate, there's something I think you should see, she said, handing me a newspaper clipping from the business section. The headline read, Morrison Construction wins Community Development Award for Affordable Housing Innovation. The article described our project as an example of how family businesses can balance profitability with community service, continuing traditions of integrity that span multiple generations. At the bottom of the article was a photo of me standing with the construction crew, all of us wearing hard hats and smiling with the satisfaction of people who were building something meaningful, rather than simply consuming what others had created. Thought about Marcus, serving his sentence and learning what accountability felt like for the first time in his privileged life. I thought about my father, whose elaborate test had revealed both the worst and best of his children's character. And I thought about the letter he had left me, promising that I would build something beautiful with what he was entrusting to me. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. Helen's voice came through the intercom. Kate, it's Detective Costa. He says Marcus is requesting a meeting with you before his release next month. I considered the request for a moment. Marcus would be released from prison soon, having served his sentence and paid his restitution. He would return to a world where his reputation was destroyed, his inheritance was gone, and his character had been publicly revealed through his own choices. Tell Detective Costa that I'll meet with Marcus under 2 conditions. First, the meeting takes place here in our father's office, surrounded by everything he tried to steal but never deserved. Second, he brings a written apology to every employee he fired, every supplier he cheated, and every person he disrespected while squandering our family's legacy. A month later, Marcus sat across from me in the same chair where I had learned about my devastating inheritance 18 months earlier. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the consequences of his choices, and the knowledge that his actions had cost him everything he thought he deserved. Prison had changed Marcus in ways that his privileged upbringing never could. The arrogance and entitlement that had defined his personality had been replaced by something approaching humility, though I wondered if this change was genuine or simply another performance designed to win sympathy. Kate, he began, his voice lacking the arrogance that had characterized our previous conversations. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what Dad was trying to teach me. I listened, without speaking, curious to hear what prison and public disgrace had taught my brother about character and consequences. I spent 6 months thinking I had won everything, and I used that time to prove I deserved nothing. I treated people badly, made selfish decisions, and dishonored everything Dad built. I see now that the real test wasn't whether I could inherit his money. It was whether I could inherit his character. Marcus pulled out a thick folder containing the written apologies I had requested. I've written letters to everyone I wronged during those 6 months. I know these letters can't undo the damage I caused, but I wanted each person to know that I understand how my actions affected them. He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily to someone who had spent his life avoiding accountability. Kate, I said that Dad never loved you anyway. That was the most wrong thing I've ever said about anyone. Dad loved you so much that he spent months planning how to protect you from someone like me. He saw exactly who I was, and he made sure I couldn't hurt you or destroy what he had built. I accepted the folder of apologies, noting that Marcus had taken the time to write personal letters to over 30 people whose lives he had disrupted during his brief period of power. Marcus, I'm glad you've learned something from this experience. But understanding what you did wrong doesn't automatically repair the damage you caused or restore the trust you destroyed. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for another chance to be part of Morrison Construction. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand why Dad chose you to carry on our family's legacy. Marcus stood to leave, pausing at the door of our father's office. Kate, for what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built with the company. The community housing project, the way you've treated the employees, the respect you've shown for Dad's memory. You've proven that you deserved everything he left you. After Marcus left, I sat alone in my father's office, surrounded by the photographs, awards, and mementos that documented 43 years of building something meaningful through integrity and service to others. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting the same light that had illuminated that devastating will reading 18 months earlier, but everything was different now. I understood my father's love. Marcus had learned about character through consequences, and Morrison Construction was building affordable housing for families who needed hope and opportunity. I opened my desk, drawer, and pulled out my father's letter, reading again his promise that I would build something beautiful with what he was entrusting to me. Looking around the office that now belonged to me, reviewing plans for projects that would help others build better lives, I realized that his promise had become reality. Not because of the money or property he had left me, but because of the values and character he had instilled in me long before any inheritance was ever discussed. Marcus had been right about one thing. We both got exactly what we deserved. He had deserved the consequences that came from revealing his true character when given power without accountability. And I had deserved a father who loved me enough to ensure that character would always triumph over entitlement in our family's legacy. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the knowledge that you are loved, trusted, and worthy of carrying forward something meaningful that will outlast your own lifetime. If this story touched you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to remember that character always reveals itself when tested, and that the people who love us most sometimes protect us in ways we don't understand until much later. Subscribe for more stories about family, integrity, and the difference between what we inherit and what we earn through our choices. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.